Well, hello there, folks. My name is Mark Miles, and I love helping trainers, presenters, workshop facilitators really take their results to the next level. And in today's video, I want to talk to you about the topic of legislation and laws. Legislation and laws. Now, the reason I want to speak to this topic is I'm kind of getting fed up, folks. I don't know if you are as well, but I'm kind of getting fed up with trainers, presenters, workshop facilitators who are stepping into a training room and teaching laws and legislation, but are not really putting much creative juice into how they're actually delivering the information. And that would show up with, I'm going to show you a slide, click, 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 and I'm just going to present a bunch of legislation to you and list it all out. And I think we need to stop insulting our audience. We need to start actually respecting our audience and actually realize that if we're going to present some information, we need to have in our mind the intention that they don't just see it, but they actually understand it and they can actually go on the way and use that knowledge, right? And we need to appreciate that laws don't change lives. Laws don't change behavior, stories do. And personal connection to that information changes lives, right? And recently with my coaching clients, been having this conversation saying, stop just presenting white noise and stop expecting people to just hear the legislation and go, oh, yeah, I'll remember that. I've memorized all that. And I'm going to go off and use it. It's not how the brain works, folks. It's just not. So stop doing it. So if we want to teach legislation in a workshop, or if we want to teach legislation and laws as part of corporate training, whatever it may be, it's time to get creative, folks. It's time to actually turn up the juice in our creative brain. All right. So the first thing we want to do, instead of listing the legislation and then presenting the reason for it, flip it around. What I mean by that is tell a story first about when something went wrong or where an accident happened, then introduce the legislation that came in to speak to that topic or that reason or that scenario or that situation, right? So have a situation that illustrates the need for it, then have the legislation that would cover that thing, right? That's going to really bring it to life, bring it to action, so to speak, for people, and they can associate into it, right? Don't say, wear a seatbelt, wear a seatbelt, wear a seatbelt, wear a seatbelt, wear a seatbelt. Right? Instead, tell a story about someone not wearing a seatbelt, then talk about the legislation for wearing seatbelts, right? So ideally, story first or case study first, then tell them the legislation and then the year it came in and the components of it, right? So that's one thing. Story first, then the legislation. Next thing, mix and match. Mix and match time, folks, right? So what you want to do is start to realize that, again, if there's no relevance or there's no real life connection, people just forget stuff, right? So have a list of maybe 20 scenarios and then 20 pieces of legislation, and then get people to mix and match the legislation to the real life incident that it would actually relate to. Not hard, folks. So basically, what you could even do is put them in teams and get them to mix and match it together and then report back to the group. Or basically, they could just draw it on a piece of paper. And that's another great way to do mix and match, right? And maybe you could have even have a couple of trick scenarios in there, or maybe multiple pieces of legislation apply to multiple scenarios, right? But whatever you want to do, create a mix and match scenario there. Next, give them a scenario and then give them the legislation and then tell them, okay, you now have a copy of the legislation. Please go ahead and underline or find the key bits in the legislation that would actually apply to this scenario, right? And again, it's a moment, it's an activation point where people are going, oh, this legislation, it actually makes sense in this scenario, and I'm starting to put it into practical use. Next idea and final idea is role plays. Role plays. Now, it may seem a little bit unusual, but again, we need to appreciate adults learn in context. So what you can actually do is you can create a number of role plays where you can have one person that says to another person, hey, have you heard about X situation that happened at X situation? No, I haven't. What happened? Well, the other day this organization or that organization, they broke XYZ legislation and this happened. Oh my gosh, not that piece of legislation, the XYZ legislation. Yeah, that one. Oh my gosh. Well, they'll have to pay so much in fines. Yes, they will. Right? So what you can do, you put into crazy scenarios, but actually in the role play conversation, people are starting to realize the relevance and how that legislation can actually play out, right? So you can put in as much detail as you want, and you can have some funny conversations, and you can hand them around the group and get people to play A and play B. But it's bringing it to life. It's bringing up the real life scenarios, right? So again, let's recap. Story first, then the legislation. Story first, then the legislation. Rule, case study first, then the legislation. Next, mix and match the scenario and the legislation. Next, X situation, now go off and highlight the key bits in the legislation that would be appropriate. Next, role play. Right? At the end of the day, whatever approach you use, start to realize without a context, it's just white noise. Without a context to apply to, people are just reading stuff that means nothing to them. So ideally, bring it to life with real world scenarios and maybe even quizzes, but linked to real world situations there. Hopefully you got some value from this video here, but I really want to encourage anyone that's speaking to legislation or frameworks or any kind of technical information without a context, don't expect people to remember it because it's not going to sink in, right? Laws don't change lives, but stories do, all right? Relevance does, and we need to be thinking, all right, cool, how do I make this memorable and how do I make it really come alive? Thanks for watching, team, and we'll see you on the next one on this channel of Speaking to Be Remembered and helping you create massive impact in whatever workshops that you run. Thanks for watching, team, and we'll see you on the next one.